Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind you is everything familiar: comfort, tradition, praise for humility, and applause for kindness. Before you lies a black chasm, a void filled with echoes of ideas too brutal for polite society. Across that abyss stands a man, solitary, gaunt, burning with something primal. Not rage, not hatred, something deeper, a smoldering disdain masked as divine indifference. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. He beckons you, not with words, but with a stare that strips you bare. You hesitate. After all, what he stands for feels wrong, dangerous. You've been told your whole life to help the weak, to protect the vulnerable, to seek gentleness over strength, kindness over power. Yet here is a man who said, "What is good?" All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power itself in man. What kind of mind could despise what we cherish? What kind of soul would call pity a disease? You search for safety in the usual answers: trauma, madness, perhaps even arrogance, but nothing quite fits. There's something almost religious in his rebellion. A prophet who saw a sickness in the very heart of morality. A sickness wearing the mask of virtue. And so, a deeper question emerges, not about Nietzsche, but about you. What if what you call kindness is actually fear? What if compassion has become a prison made of velvet bars? What if the celebration of weakness is the death knell of greatness? Your stomach turns at the thought, but the idea clings to you like smoke. Nietzsche's words were not crafted to comfort. They were daggers forged in the fire of existential disgust. He didn't simply criticize weakness. He treated it like a moral virus, a contagion of the spirit. But before we go further, we must ask, what did Nietzsche really mean by weak? He didn't mean physically frail or emotionally wounded. He meant those who refuse to become strong. Those who sabotage strength in others because they cannot bear their own insignificance. Those who worship morality not to uplift life, but to tame it. He called it slave morality, a value system born not from strength but from resentment. A creed designed not to elevate humanity, but to level it, flatten it, shackle it to sameness. In this worldview, being exceptional is a threat. Ambition is cruelty. Power is sin. And you, yes, you are breathing this morality like air. How many times have you apologized for being too bold? How often have you hidden your fire to make others comfortable? How frequently have you silenced a dangerous truth to preserve peace? What if the peace you're protecting is a lie? Nietzsche saw a world that had forgotten how to aspire and instead learned only how to cope. He saw a humanity addicted to safety, numbed by religion, tranquilized by the dogma of equality. He didn't hate weakness out of cruelty. He hated it because it betrayed what he considered sacred, the will to transcend. And yet, the paradox is brutal. In a society that celebrates compassion, can we even hear Nietzsche without recoiling? You want to dismiss him, everyone does, but part of you, some small, rebellious ember buried under years of conditioning, wants to understand. You feel it now, that quiet voice inside that whispers, there's more to life than comfort. But if Nietzsche was right, if weakness isn't just a condition but a choice, then aren't we complicit in our own decline? Imagine being told your deepest suffering is not noble, that your victimhood is not sacred, that your pain, unless transfigured into strength, is nothing but rot. Are you horrified? Or are you, somewhere deep inside, intrigued? This is the cliff you stand on. Behind you, the collective lullaby of modern virtue. Before you, a Nietzschean fire that could burn away every soft illusion you've ever been taught. You must ask yourself, before we dive deeper, have we made a god of weakness? And if so, what has that god demanded as sacrifice? The journey ahead is not safe. It is not polite. It is not balanced. But it may just be true. And truth, Nietzsche said, is never kind. It is sharp, searing, and mercilessly honest. So step forward. Lean over the edge. Ask the forbidden question, why did Nietzsche hate weak people? And more importantly, what if he had a reason? Imagine peeling back the wallpaper of your own beliefs. First, it's only small tears. You spot phrases like, everyone deserves love, and be kind no matter what, tender axioms glued to the inner walls of your mind. But as you tug harder, you reveal what's beneath. Not a foundation, but a void trembling with resentment, fear, and moral confusion. Now ask yourself, where did these comforting truths come from? And what do they cost you to uphold? Nietzsche believed we are living under the ghostly dominion of a morality born in chains. He called it sklevenmoral, slave morality, a value system not created by the strong or the free, but by the oppressed. This morality didn't arise to elevate life, but to invert its meaning. Power, once revered, became evil. Humility, once a sign of weakness, became holy. How did it begin? Nietzsche points to a pivotal reversal, the moment the powerless could not defeat the strong through force, so they did it through values. They painted the strong as wicked, and themselves as morally superior. The sword could not be wrestled away, but it could be morally condemned. And here lies the twist. This wasn't just social strategy. It became psychological necessity. Enter Carl Jung. He would later argue that when the human psyche suppresses aspects of itself, its aggression, its ambition, its raw vitality, it doesn't disappear. It festers in the unconscious, becoming what Jung called the shadow. And when society labels power and self-assertion as evil, individuals push those traits into their shadow. Over time, people forget they ever had teeth. They become sheep, docile on the outside, but brimming with hidden fangs they fear to acknowledge. Weakness, then, becomes not just a state but an identity that needs to preserve itself at all costs. And that's where things turn sinister. When your sense of self is built around being good, and goodness is defined by weakness, by passivity, victimhood, or perpetual humility, then any sign of strength becomes an existential threat. Think about it. Why do we instinctively resent confidence in others? Why does bold ambition often make us suspicious? Why do we scoff at someone who speaks with authority unless they code it in irony or apology? It's because, at a deep cultural level, we've been taught that power corrupts, and that the powerful must be watched, questioned, restrained. We've accepted this not as a political safeguard, but as a psychological default. Nietzsche's genius was to recognize the metaphysical lie embedded in this attitude, a lie that masquerades as compassion, but is rooted in something far darker: ressentiment. This French word, which Nietzsche adopts, doesn't mean mere resentment. It is a deep, festering hatred of the strong by those who cannot or will not become strong themselves. It is the alchemy by which impotence becomes virtue. The weak don't merely envy the strong. They redefine strength as evil to preserve their moral superiority. And they don't stop there. They teach their children that suffering is the truest proof of virtue, that turning the other cheek is moral high ground, not because it brings peace but because it incapacitates the strong. They sanctify victimhood, institutionalize fragility, and build systems that reward grievance over growth. This is not compassion. It is a quiet war on greatness. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's early philosophical influence, once said that compassion is the basis of all morality. But Nietzsche took that knife and turned it inward. He asked, what if compassion, when universalized, becomes a tool of decay? What if it doesn't just lift the lowly, but castrates the noble? Compassion, in excess, becomes condescension. It fosters dependency, creates people who do not strive because striving risks failure, and failure is now considered trauma. Can you feel it? This hidden morality humming underneath our culture like a low, constant frequency. Don't try too hard. Don't speak too boldly. Don't want too much. Be soft. Be agreeable. Be nice. But here's the problem. Life doesn't care about nice. Nature, Nietzsche reminds us, is not democratic. The lion does not negotiate with the gazelle. The universe does not bow to comfort. Life is will, the will to power, and anything that denies this is a denial of life itself. That's the core of Nietzsche's horror. He saw Western morality, especially post-Christian morality, as a slow suicide, a spiritual weakening dressed in the robes of holiness, a culture not in decline because of war or famine, but because it had forgotten how to love strength. He didn't preach cruelty for its own sake. He preached becoming, rising, sharpening, overcoming, not for domination, but for the glory of creation. His Übermensch was not a tyrant, but an artist of life, someone who doesn't need others to be weak, because he is too busy building his own soul. But such people are rare. Most prefer the comfort of sameness, the leveling field, the false dignity of mediocrity. And that's why Nietzsche did not merely dislike the weak. He saw in them a grave danger, because the weak do not suffer alone. They organize, they vote, they moralize, they teach, they shape the future through their values. And in doing so, they drag civilization away from its heights, down into softness, sameness, safety. A society that worships weakness, Nietzsche feared, will one day crucify strength. So ask yourself, when was the last time you admired power without shame? When did you strive without apology? When did you last feel the hunger to transcend your limits, not to heal but to rise? You feel it now, don't you? A friction, a tension between the world you were taught to admire and the one Nietzsche dared to see. But this is only the beginning, because if what we call goodness is born of resentment, then what happens to a world ruled by the resentful? What does it become? Imagine waking up in a world where no one dares to outshine anyone else, where excellence is viewed with suspicion, and striving too visibly marks you as arrogant, dangerous, even immoral. You look around and see smiling faces, polite conversations, an air of equality. But underneath the surface, something ancient and corrosive is spreading, a quiet hatred of greatness. This is not science fiction. This is your world, only unmasked. The consequences Nietzsche foresaw were not thunderous or immediate. They were subtle, creeping, systemic. He didn't fear tyrants or dictators. He feared the death of aspiration. He feared what would happen when society lost the will to transcend, when it began to confuse comfort with happiness, security with virtue, equality with truth. And that's exactly what we're living now. You've seen it, the celebration of mediocrity masquerading as inclusion, the taboo around hierarchy, be it intellectual, physical, or moral, the fear of offending, the obsession with safe spaces, not to protect the vulnerable, but to protect fragility itself from reality. Even the way we teach history, scrubbed clean of ambition, sanitized of pain, flattened into digestible lessons about tolerance and fairness. This is the invisible empire of weakness, and most of us are its unwitting citizens. Let's be clear, Nietzsche didn't oppose kindness. What he opposed was a culture built on fear of strength. He knew that when a society exalts victimhood over vitality, it produces generations that are psychologically fragile, spiritually aimless, and deeply mistrustful of excellence. But how does this happen? Neuroscience gives us a clue. The human brain is wired for what psychologists call negativity bias. We're far more sensitive to threat than reward. Combine that with status anxiety, the fear of being left behind socially, and we develop a survival mechanism: tear down what we cannot become. This is how tall poppy syndrome emerges. People instinctively cut down those who rise above, not because they're evil, but because someone else's greatness reminds them of their own passivity. And so, instead of striving upward, we sabotage those who do. But it doesn't stop there. Over time, this attitude becomes embedded in culture. It shapes policies, institutions, even language. We start rewarding narratives of oppression more than stories of triumph. We teach children that struggle is something to be avoided, not transformed. That fairness means sameness. That ambition must apologize for itself. You can see the effects in schools where discipline is labeled oppression, in social media cultures where visibility is synonymous with guilt, in bureaucracies where excellence is punished with more work, and incompetence is protected by red tape. Even in families, where a child who hungers to be extraordinary is quietly told, "Don't get ahead of yourself, just be happy." But happy how? Happy doing nothing? Happy avoiding challenge? Happy sacrificing potential for approval? Nietzsche would say, that's not happiness, that's sedation, that's life reduced to stasis, and sedation has consequences. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist, wrote that when a person's life lacks meaning, when they are no longer striving towards something greater, they begin to experience what he called the existential vacuum. Anxiety, depression, boredom, a sense of spiritual emptiness that no amount of entertainment or self-care can cure. Modern man, he said, is not suffering from too much struggle, but from too little purpose. And where does that vacuum lead? Into nihilism. Nietzsche saw this coming. He famously declared, "God is dead," not as a celebration, but as a warning. He knew that once the old moral structures crumbled, once we removed the divine scaffolding that upheld meaning, we would be left adrift. Without God, we would need a new justification for life. But instead of creating new values, we'd sink into apathy, relativism, despair. And that's where weakness becomes truly dangerous. Not just personal weakness, but institutionalized weakness, normalized weakness, weakness as identity. It doesn't stay passive. It seeks revenge, poisons the well, because deep down, the weak resent not only the strong, but the world itself for making strength necessary. This resentment doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like virtue, a university curriculum that removes difficult texts in the name of emotional safety, a company policy that prioritizes belonging over competence, a political movement that silences dissent under the banner of inclusion. And who questions it? Who dares? The moment you speak of excellence, merit, hierarchy, transcendence, you are labeled dangerous, arrogant, oppressive. The herd has learned how to punish the lion. And so we sleep, we scroll, we consume, we retreat into curated lives, curated opinions, curated outrage. We talk about mental health, but never about meaning. We talk about safety, but never about courage. We talk about acceptance, but never about transformation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we become numb. The soul atrophies. The will weakens. We mistake peace for life and neutrality for wisdom. Nietzsche called this the last man, the final stage of humanity's spiritual decline. A creature who no longer suffers, no longer strives, no longer dreams. He is content, comfortable, dull. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? The last man asks, and blinks. This is the future Nietzsche saw unfolding. Not fire and chaos, but boredom and sameness. A world without tragedy, without greatness, without assent, unless someone chooses otherwise, unless someone sees through the illusion, unless someone says, I will not apologize for wanting more. But what would that look like? How do you rebel, not just politically, but spiritually, against a world that teaches you to fear your own potential? How do you escape the gravity of weakness and rise? What if the very thing you were taught to be ashamed of is the key to your freedom? What if your hunger to rise above the ordinary, to carve your name into the skin of reality, to live a life of fire rather than fog, wasn't selfish or arrogant or toxic, but sacred? Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind you, a world of comfort, conformity, approval. Ahead, the unknown.
No guardrails, no guarantees.
Just the possibility of something real, something earned, something terrifyingly, exhilaratingly yours. Would you jump? Because that's what rebellion demands, not slogans or outrage, but a spiritual leap. Nietzsche's rebellion wasn't political. It wasn't about toppling governments or flipping the social hierarchy. It was deeper, darker, and far more personal. It was about killing the part of yourself that wanted to be liked more than it wanted to be real. To rebel against weakness, you must first confront where it lives. Inside you. It whispers when you choose silence over truth. It tightens your chest when you envy those who dare. It smiles politely when you shrink your dreams to fit other people's comfort zones. You were told humility is virtue, but is it humble to deny your own strength? You were told it's noble to play small, but is it noble to abandon your potential? Nietzsche dared to ask, what if morality itself had become a tool of suppression? What if the values we inherited, meekness, obedience, self-sacrifice, were not divine truths, but survival strategies of the weak? He traced it back to slave morality, the psychological revolt of those who couldn't dominate, and so created a morality that punished those who could. A system that called strength pride, ambition sin, and greatness evil. This wasn't a mistake. It was strategy, a brilliant subterranean revenge. To escape it, Nietzsche offered not commandments but a challenge. Become who you are. Sounds simple, but it demands war, because to become who you are means shedding every mask you wear to be accepted. It means looking into the mirror without flinching. It means refusing the narcotic of victimhood and choosing instead the crucible of transformation. It means building yourself like a work of art. The Greeks had a word, agon, the struggle, the contest, the inner war. They believed greatness was forged in conflict, not just against the world, but against the self. The part of you that clings to the herd, that wants to be soothed, not sharpened. This is where rebellion begins, not with noise, but with discipline. To live like a philosopher warrior, to treat your mind like a weapon, your life like a sculpture, your suffering like clay. Because suffering is inevitable, but what you do with it, that is rebellion. You can numb it, broadcast it, use it for pity, or you can transmute it into power, into music, into movement, into fire, into proof that you are more than what happened to you. This is what Nietzsche meant by amor fati, love of fate, not passive acceptance, not fatalism, but a fierce yes to your own life. Its pain, its joy, its failures and scars and longing. A willingness to say, even this, I will use. Do you feel it? That rising pulse, that ancient ember, that refusal to go quietly? You're not alone. Throughout history, rebels have walked this path. Misunderstood, mocked, often destroyed but never extinguished. Socrates, who chose death over silence. Beethoven, who composed his greatest symphonies in deafness. James Baldwin, who refused to edit his truth to fit anyone's comfort. Frida Kahlo, who painted her wounds into myth. Malcolm X, who reinvented himself in the furnace of solitude. None of them were safe. None of them were comfortable. All of them were dangerous because they were fully themselves. And in being so, they shattered the lie that you must be small to be good. This is your inheritance, not the morality of caution, but the morality of creation. But rebellion isn't just about defiance. It's about construction. Nietzsche called for a new kind of human. The Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, but more truly, the Overman, the one who overcomes. Not others, but himself. Not with power over people, but with power over fear, over doubt, over inherited morality. The Overman doesn't destroy values for the sake of chaos. He destroys them to create new ones, not dictated by gods or governments, but born from his own depths. This is the greatest rebellion, to write your own commandments, not because you're perfect, but because you've earned the right to speak. And make no mistake, the world will resist you. The herd will mock your fire. They will call your ambition toxic, your intensity intimidating, your standards unrealistic. They will ask you to just be normal. Let them, because rebellion means being misunderstood. It means choosing solitude over applause, sovereignty over safety. But it also means tasting a freedom most will never know. The freedom of a life that is yours, entirely, unashamedly, gloriously yours. So ask yourself, where have you been shrinking? What parts of yourself have you betrayed for belonging? Whose voice lives in your mind, telling you to tone it down? Now imagine the opposite. Imagine standing up, not in anger, but in power. Not to scream, but to build. Not to demand permission, but to take your place in the world. Can you feel it? Not the rebellion of noise, but the rebellion of becoming. And yet, there is one final truth, one final gate, a realization so deep it dissolves even rebellion itself. And unless you see it, you are still a prisoner. What if even rebellion is a trap? What if your rage, your fire, your glorious refusal to bow are still chains, forged from a different metal but chains all the same? You've rejected the herd. You've turned your back on weakness. You've embraced the chaos of creation and carved yourself into something fierce, something awake. But now, what is left? Silence, a terrifying stillness you didn't expect. You thought freedom would feel louder, brighter. But here, at the summit of self-overcoming, is a strange vertigo. You look down and see everything you've left behind. You look ahead and see nothing. No script.
No enemy.
No applause. No resistance. Just space. And now, the question Nietzsche buried like a live wire beneath all his writing begins to flicker. What do you do when there is no one left to blame? Because you are not the victim anymore. You cannot hide in injustice, in struggle, in rebellion. You have burned all your excuses. You have become the sculptor of your own existence. And now, the responsibility is total. There is no they anymore. No gods to obey. No masters to defy. No morality to inherit. No tribe to belong to. Just you, with your raw becoming, your trembling freedom, your unbearable agency. And this is the final horror of Nietzsche's vision. Not hatred of weakness, not worship of strength, but the confrontation with radical aloneness. Because if there is no ultimate meaning given to you, then meaning must be created, from scratch, with your bare hands. And that is not a relief. It is a burden so great it has shattered minds. You don't get to point to a sacred text or a political ideology or a collective trauma and say, "This is why I am the way I am." Those crutches are gone. You now stand naked before the abyss, with the terrifying freedom to invent yourself. Not once, but again and again, each day, with every action, every silence, every choice. This is the truth behind Nietzsche's most haunting idea. God is dead. Not just a deity, but the idea that meaning comes from outside you, that life has a built-in purpose, that morality has a cosmic backing, that somewhere someone is watching, weighing, guiding. That idea is dead, and with its death comes both liberation and unbearable weight. Because now you are the God, the creator, the lawgiver, the artist, and the clay. And Nietzsche didn't say this with triumph. He said it with a trembling awareness of what it demands. The courage to be utterly alone in your truth.
No applause, no even, no ultimate reward.
Just the act of living as if your life mattered, without ever being certain that it does. Can you bear it? Can you live with a meaning that dies if you stop creating it? Can you love your fate so deeply that you would live it again, and again, and again, for eternity? Because that's Nietzsche's final test. The thought experiment of eternal recurrence. He asks, if a demon whispered in your ear that every joy, every sorrow, every breath and mistake and triumph in your life would repeat forever, would you weep or rejoice? Would you collapse in despair, realizing you've been wasting the only life you'll live, again and again? Or would you rise with a furious yes in your chest, and live in such a way that you'd want it to repeat? This is the true measure, not of morality, but of authenticity. It's not about whether you're strong or weak, rebellious or obedient. It's about whether you are living in a way that makes you proud, without needing anyone to see it. Because now the crowd is gone, the enemy is gone, the stage is gone, and the only one watching is you. This is the great reversal, the place where Nietzsche's apparent hatred of weakness dissolves, not into softness, but into compassion. Not sentimental compassion, but existential solidarity. Because once you've stood at the edge of the void and seen what it takes to build meaning from nothing, you cannot help but understand how few are willing or able to face it. So now, you no longer mock the weak. You no longer judge the herd. You see their safety, their submission, their moral systems, not as evil but as understandable. Because the burden of true freedom is unbearable to most. And so, in this final understanding, Nietzsche's fire becomes something new. Not scorn, not pride, but a fierce compassion. The kind that doesn't coddle or lie, but holds you to your highest self because it knows you're capable of more. You no longer need to hate weakness, because you've outgrown the need to define yourself against anything at all. You don't rebel to prove you exist. You exist as rebellion embodied, as living will, as self-becoming, and in that you find the only real peace. Not comfort, but coherence. Your life aligns, your choices echo, your values are not preached but lived. There is no more battle, only the daily dance of creation, only the sacred work of waking up each day and whispering, I choose this, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because it's yours. And now, as you close this chapter, you don't walk away with answers, but with a question that will haunt you, shape you, and maybe, if you're honest enough, set you free. Are you living in a way that you would choose again and again and again? Because in the end, Nietzsche didn't hate weak people. He hated the lies we tell ourselves to stay weak. And he loved, more than anything, the human soul's terrible, beautiful power to become more. Let that power wake you. Let it disturb you. Let it demand something raw and real. And when you stand alone before your life and all that you've made of it, may you smile, not with comfort, but with courage, the kind of courage that needs no witness.